I strongly disagree with Secretary of State Dean Rusk, who said on October 12, 1967, in Los Angeles, I quote Secretary Rusk, "We Americans are debating only variations of a theme. I find no significant body of American opinion which would have us withdraw from Vietnam and abandon Southeast Asia to the fate for which Asian communism has planned for it." Secretary Rusk continues, quote, "Similarly, I find no serious opinion among us which wishes to transform this struggle into a general war." End of Secretary Rusk's quote. No one should impugn the integrity or the sincerity of Secretary of State Dean Rusk, but he is no doubt so deeply committed to his Far East theories that he no longer can see the trees of reality. I believe he is wrong on both counts. Our present administration's policy is held in great disrepute in this country and abroad, and if continued, could very well lead us into a third world war. I contend that unless there are drastic changes made in our Vietnam policies, most Americans would rather pull out of Vietnam. We must remember, lest our pride rule our reason, that withdrawal does not mean defeat. Dean Rusk is correct when he says, quote, "No one wants a third world war." But he is wrong if he thinks our present policies in Vietnam could not lead us into it. We have taken so long to win this war that now the Red Chinese and the Russians may just decide that they can no longer allow us to win. If we had won a quick victory, as the Russians did in Hungary, it would have been a fait accompli, and the war would have been over. Now the stakes are too high, and the Russian commitment perhaps too deep to allow us to prevail. And let us make no mistake. Regardless of the outcome of this Vietnam War, the Russians and the Chinese will try again elsewhere. We shall be forced to make the same decision all over again in some other far-off land. This is only the beginning. It is not the end. Secretary Rusk continues, and I quote, "In August 1964, the Congress by joint resolution declared with only 2 dissenting votes that the U.S. regards as vital to its national interest and to world peace the maintenance of international peace and security in Southeast Asia." End of Secretary Rusk's quote. Many of us believe, however, that the United States need have no guilt feelings if it decided to change its mind. We've changed our political course and our allies so many times in our history that it would not be a national catastrophe for us to reconsider again. We cannot use as our reason for being in Vietnam any other than our own self-interest. The tragedy of our situation is that no Democrat and no Republican leader is willing to stand up in Congress and shout, "Enough already. Let's get out of Vietnam now on the best terms possible." Senators Fulbright, Mansfield, Symington, McCarthy, Gore, Church, Morse, and a few others have questioned the administration's policy, but none has gone all out in his protest in the Senate to say, "Fellows, it looks like we made a mistake in voting the Gulf of Tonkin resolution in 1964. This resolution has not served the best interests of our country. So let's vote a new Vietnam resolution. Let us vote to get out of Vietnam now, unless our allies around the world share our conviction that communism must be stopped in Vietnam. The only way our allies can demonstrate their belief in the validity of our Vietnam involvement is to join us on the battlefield and to stop trading with the enemy. I predict we would soon find out that we stand alone and that we've been named honorary policemen of the free world by those very nations who supposedly fear communism. Both major parties, Democrat and Republican, are wrong if they refuse to make a political issue of this Vietnam War, for it is the overriding issue of the day. Both major parties are wrong if they do not allow the American voter to have the deciding voice in our future Vietnam policy. If we are confronted with comparable Vietnam situations in the future, unless there is a definite war emergency calling for an immediate military response by the United States, the power to declare war or to send our troops into battle should be taken out of the hands of Congress and out of the hands of the President. The commitment to put our troops into battle should be voted by the people who must shoulder this war burden. The voters must be told by their president, frankly and honestly, that if we vote for war, we must pay for it by drastically higher wartime taxes, by our commitment and personal sacrifices at home, which would include the outlawing of strikes during wartime, the freezing of prices and profits, make it mandatory for all able-bodied men to serve in the armed forces regardless of National Guard affiliation, eliminate college deferments, and compel conscientious objectors to serve in the medical or supply corps, or receive severe and lengthy jail terms extending long after peace was achieved. This nonsense that permits our fighting men to be the sole segment of our society to feel the horror and sacrifice of war must come to an end. It is not the American way, and it is not democratic. If the war issue were put to a vote in this country, everyone 18 years and older must have a vote. It's been obvious for a long time that boys who are old enough to fight and die for their country are old enough to vote. Voting is more meaningful and far more democratic than demonstrating. If our country votes for a war, we must all pay. The practice of financing a war by deficit spending is a deceit of the highest order. The profits made in a war by some, as against those who must pay with their lives, is a national disgrace. For the price of war is real. It's incumbent upon any president to be honest with the nation and point out the true meaning of war in terms of men, in terms of money, and in terms of national commitment and sacrifice. Who in this country has been forced to modify his standard of living because of this Vietnam War? Now, I speak as one who enlisted in World War II, as one who received a battlefield commission, as the father of 2 teenage sons and a daughter attending college. I do not believe that this is a war worthy of our involvement, and certainly not a war worth dying for. Our young men, our sons, live only once. Life is far too precious for us to squander our men with the same reckless abandon that we waste our national resources and money. Our Constitution states very clearly that Congress has the power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water. But our Congress has failed to use this power and has abdicated its power in favor of the President by allowing him to involve this nation in what is now popularly termed a state of undeclared war. The heart of this matter is that we may be forced to make some constitutional changes which give to the people the authority to declare war. If today the Catholic Church can pause and reflect on some of its most sacred and historical customs and dogma, perhaps it's time for all of us in America to reconsider the powers we have granted to any one man who is elected president, and the powers that we have granted to the Congress. For is any one man truly wise enough, strong enough, informed enough to pass judgment and lead us in all phases of our national life? Are we justified in putting our destiny concerning the vital issue of war into the hands of any one man, no matter how well-intentioned he may be? How many more undeclared wars can this country of ours afford? Can we and should we continue to give our proxy on the life and death issue of war to a Congress which may not act responsibly, which may decide for political reasons to throw the controversial war ball to the President because it's too hot to handle? If the Vietnam involvement is not a war, then most of us need a new definition for the word. Congress has had ample time to declare war, but refuses to do it. How many American boys must be killed on the battlefield before we are officially engaged in war? Is the magic figure 25,000, 50,000, 100,000? How much does an undeclared war have to cost before it graduates into an honest-to-goodness war? $75 billion? $100 billion? $200 billion? Surely there is some point where we admit to ourselves and to the world that we are, in fact, at war. Our national election in 1968 must not become another popularity contest. We have had more than enough broken campaign promises concerning this Vietnam War. I believe that this burning, critical issue of our time must be placed squarely on the ballot so that our next president, Democrat or Republican, will respond to the will of the people. For what choice does the American voter have between Johnson, Nixon, Rockefeller, Reagan, or Romney as regards the Vietnam War? All five are committed to pursue the war. The only difference is how we shall continue to fight it. Meaningful democracy demands that we separate the major issues from the candidates. If we as a nation can vote locally on school, water, and state transportation bond issues, then certainly we can arrange to put the Vietnam War issue to a direct vote by the people. Our angry young men are guilty of breaking the law when they burn their draft cards or our American flag, and they must be punished. No American citizen has the right to violate the laws of our land. But by the same token, a great disservice to our country has been committed by our president, who was elected on a campaign to lead this country to a satisfactory and workable conclusion of the Vietnam War. Let us not forget that former Senator Barry Goldwater was defeated because he appeared to be unstable, irrational, and sure to lead this country into World War III by pursuing the Vietnam War with reckless escalation. I charge the present administration with gross misrepresentation, with deceit, and with a flagrant misuse of presidential power. Today, there is very little difference between the Goldwater program of 1964 and the Johnson administration policy of 1967. If anything, Barry Goldwater may have had a more logical approach. As long as we were in this ridiculous war, we should have won it. At least he was honest. He told the voters of his Vietnam strategy, and he was defeated. President Johnson soft-pedaled the Vietnam issue, and he was elected. I say to you, loud and clear, let us get out of Vietnam now on the best possible terms. Let us never, never again become involved unilaterally in any war, declared or undeclared, unless our own great, big, wonderful country is threatened, or where our allies join us in a combined effort to stop an aggressor. It is imperative that we learn from this Vietnam involvement that we alone cannot police the world. This war has proved to many of us that we are guilty of an arrogance of power, and that we do not now enjoy international support and respect. We have so many tremendous problems within our own country. Let us spend the men and the resources to solve them. Let us learn from this Vietnam War experience that we have an obligation to ourselves to spend as freely for peace as we do to wage war. Please allow me to repeat this last statement, for it is something we have never been willing to do. Let us learn from this Vietnam War experience that we have an obligation to ourselves to spend as freely for peace as we do to wage war. Once we do that, the civil rights demonstrations with their violence and destruction will no longer be with us. If we can spend $35 billion a year to fight a war 12,000 miles from our shores, we must be willing to pledge ourselves to ensure a decent way of life for all of our citizens at home and pay for it. Oh, there's so much we can do. Our lives will be far richer by building the areas of our society that need our concentration and effort, instead of building the tools of war and destruction. Your voice and your influence is so much greater than mine that I urge you to re-examine your stand on Vietnam. I appeal to you to help lead our country in a new direction toward peace. Dynamic, powerful, and influential American citizens like you must take the lead in charting a new course for our country at home and abroad. It is your responsibility, but it is also your opportunity to assume the leadership your present position affords. Yours is the voice which can determine our destiny. Please,